Welcome to the podcast of the Composition and Music Theory Department of the Karol Szymanowski Music Academy in Katowice.
Dear Mr. Salonen, first of all, thanks for finding time in this very intense week for you with the premiere of your Organ Concerto or Sinfonia Concertante. We will come back later to the topic of that later. Let me for starters sum you up quickly. Your adventure with music started on the trumpet. Later you played the horn. You became a composer, studied actually at quite a young age with Aino Juhani Rautavaara, with whose style of teaching you apparently had some issues. Co-founded in a sort of rebellious move, maybe, a new music society with such people as Kaija Saariaho and Magnus Lindberg. Studied also in Italy, became a conductor, at first out of need to conduct this new music with Korvat Auki. Very soon a very famous conductor, went to live in the United States, became a star of the classical music world both as a composer and conductor. There is this phrase in Finnish, or rather a statement that I quite often retell to my students, Korvat Auki, open ears. It's the name of the new music society mentioned earlier. Maybe we could start with that. What does this mean to you now after all those years?
The good news is that it's still alive, and there is like a third generation of young composers, members of the Korvat Auki Ears Open Society, which we started with Kaija, Magnus and some other friends in the 70s already. So that's good, that's great. And you know, the young composers of the young Finnish and composers who are active in Finland, they don't have to be Finnish. Those members, they of course do completely different things from what we used to do. But the spirit is the same. This is the forum where you can try out all kinds of things and you can operate outside the institutions, and you can be free, you can be with friends, and you don't have to worry about your career, you don't have to worry about the critics or the audience or anything, because this is just like something for pure music. So I'm really happy that we started something in the 70s that is still active and alive. When I think back to my young years as a composition student, Finland, it's funny because the musical culture in Finland was more conservative than what it was here in Poland. Nevertheless, Poland was behind the Iron Curtain, and Finland was not. So Finland belonged to the West already then. Of course, balancing, somehow with the big neighbor, but still, it was a geopolitically different situation. Nevertheless, the musical climate was quite conservative, and kind of categorical. There were composers like Aulis Sallinen, Joonas Kokkonen, who wrote symphonies. Symphonies are a real thing, not something that Stockhausen wrote. Symphonies like a serious thing, and operas, and those operas were about the Finnish history. And we, the young composers, composing students, we thought this was deadly boring. Super boring. And we made a word for those operas, the Sallinen and Kokkonen operas. We called them the fur hat operas, which those composers didn't like very much. But, when you're young, you're supposed to kind of be cynical of your elders. And then you become the old fart yourself later in life, and then the next generation is going to be critical of you, and that's, I think, the way it should be. It's totally healthy. But we felt that we needed to open opened the windows to Europe, to the new ideas and new ideas for us were actually not that new. They were like the Darmstadt ideas from the 50s and the 60s, you know, music by Boulez and Stockhausen, Nono, etc., Kagel, maybe, Berium, Sierotsky, Lukosławski, Bogusław Schäfer, Baird. You know, we were actually quite enthusiastic about Polish new music. Witold visited Finland many times, or several times, and he was given the Vihuri Prize, which is the biggest music prize in Scandinavia, and he made a big impression on all of us students. But the idea was that we started this society and we organized performances of new works. We hired the entire Finlandia Hall, which was like the big concert hall in Helsinki. We hired the whole hall and did Mikrofoni by Stockhausen, which was basically 1 hour of 6 guys scraping a tam-tam. And my mom came to the concert and she invited my cousins and some of her friends, so we had like 20 people there. But we did it anyway. And we organized happenings and we played new music at gas stations. We went to prisons. And the idea was that new music is good for you. It's like, it might be a medicine that tastes a little, you know, not so good, but it's good for you. It makes you a better person. That was the idea. So we spread the word. And of course, we learned a lot from each other. So we started our own composition seminar. And everyone had to kind of give a lecture. Every week, one of us was giving a lecture to the others. And we had analysis weekends in Kaija Saariaho's house. She came from a wealthy family, so she had a nice house close to the sea, and we had analysis seminars every weekend. So there was analysis, and then there was a lot of drinking. Fantastic. Good days.
And what did those inmates or maybe first, what did your cousins say on this piece of Stockhausen, and how did the inmates in the prison react to the new music, to spreading the word?
The funny thing was that my mom, who was not a musician at all, she became a big enthusiast of contemporary music. And she cooked for all the young composers and washed their socks and stuff. And she was very central in the life of us young composers. And even she sadly died two months ago at the age of 94. But even when she was still healthy enough to go to concerts, she was complaining that, oh, Brahms, so boring. Why is there nothing new? There should be a piece by Magnus Lindberg or something. And she was then like 85 years old, and I thought, okay, good, thank you, Mom. You know, my experience then is the same as it is today, which is that if you play new music with conviction on the highest possible level, and you play music that you really believe in, it does speak to people who know little about music in general. And in some cases, one of my cousins, I have 40 cousins, so one of them was married to a chemistry professor who knew zero about classical music, but he loved Stockhausen because it somehow sounded more real to him. Brahms didn't, Debussy didn't, Sibelius didn't. He found Sibelius totally boring, but Stockhausen, yeah, that's great. And I realized that so much about the reception problem is not real. It's just a perceived thing. And if you do it seriously, and people can tell that you're serious about it and you're passionate about it and so on, it usually works. If the music is good enough. Then bad music doesn't communicate, no matter what. But good music does.
Is it though? Because in a way you spoke, I did some research and you spoke about your own change, maybe change of belief. As some quotes, my focus moved from an ideological principle to a pleasure principle. Only after a couple of years did I begin to see that the European canon I blindly accepted was not the only truth. It had been inculcated with negatives such as to avoid melody, harmonic identity and rhythmic pulse, which is interesting because it's maybe the main aspects of your music today. I think like pulse and also melody, and I have to admit I have a feeling of a Finnishness of this music that is somehow related to your forefathers, to Sibelius maybe even, this rhythmic pulse and this broad wide melodies. And this question is a bit broader because it's also connected to your experiences abroad. You went to Italy to study, and later you lived for many years in the United States, conducting the LA Philharmonic and now the San Francisco Symphony. And yeah, well, what can you say about that?
Okay, so I was brought up, educated in the very strict modernist tradition, in the spirit of Pierre Boulez, etc., etc. And I studied with Ratovara, who was, of course, not a strict modernist, but I was. And then I went to study with Donatoni, and I studied with Castiglioni in Milan also. So I was kind of in that segment firmly, and a few things happened. The modernist principles were just a bunch of taboos. It was just a list of things that you were not allowed to do. You were not allowed to use octaves. Okay, that's an idiotic thing to say. You were not allowed to write melodies. Another idiotic thing to say. If you wrote strict 12-tone music for orchestra, you ran out of notes if you were not allowed to double in octaves. So every orchestral piece written in this kind of tradition sounds kind of thin. And pulse, I mean, if pulse is not allowed, then what's left in it? And I was caught in a sort of personal dichotomy, because I loved the big resonance of a symphony orchestra, and I loved to conduct Bruckner and Strauss and Stravinsky and all that stuff. And yet I was writing music that I felt somewhere that it wasn't me. But there was this funny thing about music style as a moral choice, and that came from Boulez, whom I knew very well, and he changed his mind towards the end. I can tell you more about that later, but so he made these statements, especially when he was young and angrier. He was still angry when he was 80 years old, but when he was young, he was super angry. So he wrote things like, a composer who has not understood the necessity of serialist techniques is useless. If you take that sentence and change it a little bit, the form would be a composer who hasn't understood that art has to be in service of the proletariat. That would be exactly the statement of Zdanov in 1948 when the Soviet Composers Union Congress condemned Shostakovich and Prokofiev for formalism. It's the same kind of totalitarian statement, coming from a different angle, but totalitarian nevertheless. So the thing about Boulez and his cycle and circle was that style is a moral choice. You can do the right thing or you can do the wrong thing. And if you do the right thing, you're okay and you belong. If you do the wrong thing, you're out. Now when I think about those years, it was like a fascist idea. So one of the last conversations I had with Pierre Boulez was, it actually happened in LA, backstage in the Walt Disney Concert Hall. He came to conduct Sur un Six in a memorial concert for Ernest Fleischmann, who was the managing director of the LA Philharmonic for many years, who was close friends with Boulez and so on. And I bumped into him backstage, and Boulez was never a man of niceties, you know. He would never say, "How are you? Nice to see you." He said, "Esa-Pekka, I conducted Schönberg Opus 31 last week." I said, "Oh, okay. And he said, "It's idiotic. No, not one, not two, not three, not four, not five, and then not 11, and then not 12, and then you can do not one. That's ridiculous," he said. I said, "Pierre, are you denouncing 12-tone music here?" "Well, perhaps I am," he said. "And I have witnesses." And then it was a funny thing, because he conducted his Sur un Six in the first half of the concert. In the second half, there were some smaller pieces and a little song by me for children's chorus. This was about 10 years ago, so I was over 50 years old already, not exactly a young person, but I was so nervous. I'm sitting next to Pierre Boulez. He came to sit next to me in the second half, and then the LA Children's Chorus is singing this little song of mine, and I was sweating. So what will Pierre Boulez say when he hears this model little piece? And I was like, and I was angry at myself, because I was trying to tell myself, "Listen, dude, you're an old man. You shouldn't be afraid of this other old man next to you." Then it was over, and he looked at me and said, "That was pretty." And I thought, shit, Pierre Boulez says pretty. Most likely, for the first time in his life, he used the word pretty. So I was kind of relieved that, oh wow, I survived this day too. Anyway, so we all changed. And Boulez was interesting because he had a somewhat ironical attitude towards his own taboos. In the 90s, I conducted a new production of the Rake's Progress in Paris at the Châtelet Theatre, and he came to one of the shows, came backstage and said, "You almost convinced me about this piece." I said, "What do you mean, almost?" "Well, my generation was supposed to hate this music." And then he started laughing. And I don't quite know what he meant, but like, did he hate it, or was he laughing at the old days when you had to hate the neoclassical style of Stravinsky? The late style was okay, and the early Russian ballets were okay, but everything in between was like a material that you should hate. Who knows? It's too late to ask him, sadly, but he was an interesting man.
And where did this fear or this pressure you felt come from? Well, I must admit, I am from Darmstadt. I was born in Darmstadt, actually,
Oh, yeah.
and I felt it like from the environment that I grew up in. But well, did you in a way impose this kind of thinking on yourself in this Korvat Auki group, like with your peers, or where does it come from actually? Because like from your professors in Finland, probably not. Maybe from the Italian ones, Donatoni, Castiglioni.
Well, you know, I think young people mostly want to know the truth. You want to do the right thing. And you would like to have very clear messages. What is good and what is bad, what is right, what is wrong, left, right, you know, that kind of thing. And Boulez was the one who gave those answers. He said, if you do this, you're fine. If you do this, you're just shit. So it was kind of, it gave me certain security, if you know what I mean. So serial music was okay. And some other kind of music was not okay. And of course, what happens quite often when you get older is that you realize that there are endless shades between the black and the white. And I came to the conclusion that I'm actually not, when I'm writing music, it's not a moral statement I'm making. I'm not dealing with the truth. I think the politicians should be dealing with the truth because that's their profession. They get paid for that, and every one of them seems to have it. So that's fine, especially now in today's Europe, lots of truths around. So I came to the conclusion that, as a matter of fact, what I'm doing is not necessarily about being right or wrong. I stopped seeing music as some kind of a trial, you know, like a trial where you have the judge and the jury and you present this kind of evidence, and then there's the causality, you know, that certain things leads to another and so on. So I stopped thinking that way. I started to ask myself, so what do you really like? What is really you? What's your do I have a voice, or is everything just like mirrors and so on? And I went through a crisis. I really did. I didn't know what the hell to do. And if you know the play by Ibsen, Peer Gynt, there's a famous scene where Peer Gynt peels an onion, and the onion becomes a metaphor for his true self. And so he's peeling an onion, he's trying to find the nucleus, you know, the kern in the onion. Of course, there isn't any, because an onion is just like endless layers. And he comes to the end, and there is nothing inside, it's just layers. And then he thinks that, okay, this is me. There was nobody inside, it's just layers. So I went through a few years like that, and I had the kind of perfect excuse. I was busy conducting, and I was, but the real reason was that I didn't know what to write. And I knew I wanted to write music, but I didn't know how and what kind. And finally, I was in my 30s already, and I started playing with some harmonic ideas. And of course, I still started from a 12-tone thing, but I split the 12-tone series into 2 hexachords, and then started building harmonies based on hexachords, and all of a sudden things opened up. Because in my ears, if I hear a chord with 6 notes, it's a chord. If I hear a chord with 7 or more notes, it becomes like a cluster. It's individual, but for me, a hexachord has a harmonic identity. And so I started building my music from hexachords, and then, if you add 1 note to a hexachord, quite often you have a modal scale. So all of a sudden I had tools that allowed me to write music that has a certain resonance, harmony that has an identity, but music that is not strictly speaking tonal. It's modal, and I got going from there, and I'm still developing the same tools, but all of a sudden I was able to do things like modulation. If I think of my top 10 moments in music, it changes always, but many of them are modulations, or something that does behave like a modulation. Even in Ligeti, there are these moments in Clocks and Clouds when the sort of chromatic material filters into a pentatonic chord, and then starts growing again. So we experience this as a modulation, and it's a very strong dramaturgical tool. Ligeti was very smart. He developed lots of methods to get around various taboos of contemporary music. Zarathustra was another composer who really built his music from the harmonic point of view. And Pierre also tried to. He was more primitive in his harmonic thinking, because usually Pierre's music is based on these monolithic chords where the harmonic rhythm is quite slow, and then the movement happens, like the passing notes between the anchors of his chords. It so happens that the very last chord of my piece is exactly the same as Pierre's O King. If you remember the Sinfonia, I think it's the second movement. So in his case, the whole movement is based on that one chord. Anyway, but that's a pure coincidence. So I was close personally with Zarathustra. He was a big influence in my life. I worked a lot with Ligeti. We had a falling out, sadly, towards the end. He was really awful with me, and finally we had the last meeting we had, I just lost it. I started shouting at him, and I said, "You are so full of shit." And he said, "Maybe." And that was the last exchange we had, and of course, I would be happier if it had been different, but it wasn't. And I worked with Donatoni even after I had been his student, and he wrote his last piece for me. So I had, and I was pretty close to Boulez also.
It's called Esa, the piece.
Yeah, it is actually, yeah. It's his last piece, and he was so sick that he couldn't actually hold the pen, so he dictated it to his students in a hospital in Milan. And I never thought I would see the piece, but one day it was in the mail, and I opened it and it said Esa, Donatoni, last piece. It was a deeply moving moment.
Maybe to approach a bit more the piece that is upcoming, there's a question. My next question is about this new piece. It was advertised as an organ concerto, and you've written concertos before for saxophone, cello, violin, and the piano. Actually, they spanned for the whole time of your pieces that are published on Chester. And my original question was, what does the concerto genre mean to you? It's maybe one of the big forms, like the sonata, the symphony, the concerto. It's maybe the lightest of those big forms, the most elastic.
I agree.
Yeah,
I agree. It's very easy to define concerto. Concerto is a large-scale piece where one instrument has a more prominent role than the others. That's a concerto. I mean, there are no other requirements. So, in a way, when you write a concerto, you are safely further away from tradition. And, if you think of some of the anti-concertos that were written in the 60s, like Ligeti's cello concerto, there's no concertante element. The cello part is very static and so on, but he called it the concerto nevertheless. So it's a sort of safe word to use, and I thought once I had finished the organ piece, I thought that the role of the organ varies so much. So sometimes it plays alone, sometimes it behaves like a soloist where the orchestra is accompanying, and then sometimes it's like an equal partner to some soloists from the orchestra, and then sometimes it totally sinks into the orchestra and has a supportive role, and sometimes it just overpowers everything else, because of the noise it makes. And I thought maybe I should use a different title. And I also thought, at this point in my life, what would happen if I called something a Sinfonia? Nothing has happened yet. And I tried it out with some of my friends. I called Anders Hillborg, the Swedish composer. I said, what if I call it Sinfonia? He said, yeah, kind of boring, but it's okay. and I called Kaya, and she said, yeah, it's fine. Just do it. So I did.
But you did it like some days ago, because I've seen the notes of the orchestra. They still have organ concerto on it.
Yeah, I mean, I finished this piece very late. I sent the last files to my publisher in December 19th. So it was really last minute, which happens often with me, but this was more extreme than almost ever. So I got really behind.
And Sinfonia, well, that is Italian for symphony, and obviously, and this is like the second part of my question. There's a kind of a legendary conversation between Mahler and Sibelius again. And Mahler stating that symphony must be like the world, it must embrace everything, while Sibelius would find beauty and meaning in its severity of form and profound logic. How does your piece, or does it at all, relate to any of those statements?
Now the musicologists in Finland say that conversation never happened. So it was just
beautiful anyway.
Yeah, it's a good story, but most likely Sibelius was so shy and so intimidated by this famous man that he said nothing. And then he was just like... It's very funny to read Mahler's letters back to Alma when he's describing his days in Helsinki. He said that these are very nice people, they're very hospitable, but I wonder when they sleep. And also he said that for him it was difficult to get into the habit of having 7 schnapps before the soup, which seemed to be the case with Sibelius and Kajanus and so on. You know, when I was graduating from Sibelius Academy and was trying to decide where to go to study abroad, I thought, I want to go somewhere where Sibelius is not on the map at all. And also I didn't want to go to Paris because Magnus was going to Paris. I didn't want to go to Germany because Kaja went to Freiburg. I didn't want to go to the same place. So what was left? Italy. And I thought, if I go to Milan, that's a Sibelius-free zone. So at least I can breathe and be happy. Yeah. Okay, it was pretty much, you know, in the 80s, Sibelius was very little known in outside Scandinavia and the Anglo-Saxon countries, like in the UK and in America played a lot, but in Italy, pretty unknown. So I was happy. Then one day, I found an antiquariat, old books shop very close to the Scala, and I developed the habit of going several times a week. When I went to my lessons with Castiglione, I would also go to the bookshop and browse through old books, and one day I found a pocket score of Sibelius' 7th Symphony in that one of the piles, and I bought it because it was 500 liras, which those days was exactly the same as an espresso, so it was cheap. So I bought it, and then I took the bus back to my digs. I was staying in an industrial suburb of Milan called Magenta. And I started reading the score on my way back, and I thought, this is really different from all other music. It even looks different on the page. And it definitely behaves differently. The form seems totally different from anything that a German composer would write or a French composer would write. Why? It's because of the idea of getting rid of the seams, getting rid of the kind of the border between sections. And I got the feeling that this grows like a tree or like a garden. It's not something that is being put together by a skillful mechanic, but it's more like something that grows on its own because of its DNA. And that was the moment when I realized that I hated all those, the patriotic, the Finlandia, and I hated the 2nd Symphony because it was so, obvious. I thought banal and so on, but I realized that there's no other composer who thinks like that. And I thought, okay, I'm actually really impressed by this composer, despite the fact that I'm Finnish, and despite the fact that Sibelius was everywhere. So it was an interesting discovery, and since then, he has been a big part of my life. But I think you have to kind of kill your fathers first, and then try to revive them.
I think it's a very nice story that you went to Italy to get rid of Sibelius, a Sibelius-free zone, and kind of reconnected with him.
Yeah, I failed. On some level I failed, and on some level I'm happy I reconnected.
But that's great, it's like this good grey zone, it's neither white nor black again.
Totally.
Yeah. There must be one question about conducting as a composer. Some weeks ago I had the opportunity, first time in my life, to conduct a performance of a chamber music piece I wrote. And I must admit I secretly sometimes dreamed of conducting, but this experience, which I enjoyed in a way, also made me aware of the comfort a composer enjoys sitting in his chair, his comfortable chair in the hall, with his score wide open, taking notes during the rehearsal, speaking to the conductor later and with an espresso or something, and the musicians. How does that feel to you, the experienced conductor, between being in the middle of it, at the center of energy, but also very much responsible, and the distance perspective, because of course other conductors do your music, as a pure listener of the music, enjoying the performance from the chair, but also without the direct possibility to intervene?
To conduct my new piece, the first rehearsal, I don't like it because so much is coming at you. The bandwidth you need it fries my brain, because you have to make a split-second judgment whether, if something doesn't sound right, if something doesn't come out right, you have to kind of judge whether it's something wrong in the piece itself, something wrong in the orchestration or the notation, or just wrong thought, or whether it's the orchestra not being able to play it yet, or whether it's the conductor not conducting it very well, and I have to kind of judge between these three aspects all the time, and it's my least favorite moment. So Rautavaara used to say, never go to the first rehearsal, go to the second rehearsal. That's much better. In my case, I quite often have to go to the first rehearsal because of this. People like Strauss, he let other conductors do the first 4 weeks of his opera rehearsals, and then he would go and hear the first stage in orchestra or something, and then, But he was different because he wrote conductor-proof music. I tell you, if an Orang-Utan would conduct also sprach Zarathustra, it would sound fine. You can't destroy it, it's incredible. He's the only composer like that. Mahler would be quite easy to break, but Strauss just plays itself. Nothing to do, just make sure that your hair is good. Trade secret. Then, of course, I hear my conductor colleagues, conduct my pieces, and that can be sometimes my best moments ever have been witnessing a colleague do my piece, and in such a way that I not only is it very well performed, but he or she has found something new in the piece that I didn't know was there. This happens every so often, and these are the best moments. Then, there are the okay performances, and then there are the super bad performances where things have not been rehearsed properly, and the conductor doesn't know the piece very well, and the orchestra's like, but it's part of a composer's life. You cannot protect your pieces. You write them, and then they are out, and they are on their own. So I stopped worrying. It still annoys me if I hear a super bad performance of a piece of mine. It's irritating and I get angry, but I don't get desperate. It's okay, well, happens. It's life.
And my final question would be about one of your fields of interest, technology. Technology and composition. Maybe another part of the question would be, as you travel a lot, you conduct a lot, you work a lot, when and how do you actually compose?
I try to have about 5 months a year free from conducting and traveling. The problem with the arithmetic is that if I have 5 months of non-conducting, it doesn't mean that it's 5 months for composing, because there's a thing called a life. spending time with my children, seeing my friends, you know, taking the car to be serviced, you know, all kinds of things, normal things that people do in their lives, going to see a film, you know, hanging out with colleagues. So it's not really 5 months, but I'm trying to avoid the panic that I think most of us feel when you sit down and you think, okay, I'm going to compose now, and then there's the paper or the screen, whichever the method is, or you're thinking, and nothing comes to your mind, like nothing. You're just dead and empty, no ideas, and you feel that this is the end of everything. I hate those moments, so I try to collect material all the time, write down something or store ideas in my mind, or type them into a laptop, or these days even iPad works. And when I then have my composing period, the official composing period, I have something already. Most of it is useless, but I have something. I don't have to kind of sit down and reinvent the wheel. I have like a bag full of stuff, and some of it might have some potential, some of it is just rubbish and I throw it away. But at least I don't have that panic, I have something to go by. And sometimes I take an old piece of mine and just pull it apart and see if out of that material could be one could assemble another piece out of that material. And every few years I have a research period when I'm not trying to write a piece, but I'm just researching, developing material. And last time I had one was in 2015, and now I feel that I've come to a point where I need to have another one. So next summer is going to be my research summer, and I cancelled. I was supposed to be writing a song cycle commission, but I cancelled it. So I'm just for a couple of months I'll just sit there and write down ideas and see where material could go.
And where do you compose? Is it Finland? Do you return to Finland, to your home? You spoke in some interview about your love for nature and how you like to go to the woods and in other parts of the world, but I like this expression. Every tree feels wrong because there are the trees, there are the animals. Even the squirrels are different in America.
Well, that's a funny thing actually. If I'm totally comfortable in many cities in the world, cities I know well, like New York, LA, London, Paris, etc., Stockholm, Helsinki. Cities are fine. Forest is very different. As you said, I have this experience that when I go to a forest, say in California, or even in Denmark or something, it's wrong. It's wrong. It smells wrong. The birds sound a little off. The trees are not the right kind of trees, And then I go to my home forest by the Baltic coast, and everything is, that's it. That's a forest. It's all fine. And I cannot explain this. And the birds sound just right. It's very weird. But composing, I don't have the luxury of being very picky about where I write, so I do quite a bit of writing in my home in San Francisco, and I also have a place in LA that I can use, and so that I've done pretty much work in LA under the radar, and Helsinki, of course, or the Finnish countryside, airplanes, hotels. I wrote a song cycle called the Sappho Songs back in 1999, and the first song I wrote at a police station in Helsinki. I was waiting to renew my driver's license, and there was a huge queue, and it took me several hours to do it. So I sat there and started sketching a song, and that became the first song of the cycle. So that's my personal, the weirdest place where I've written music.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time. And it was, I think, very enriching for us all. We look forward for the premiere of your piece tomorrow evening. I don't know if you have time for a question from the public.
Sure. Can I just say one thing? Most of you are composition students, right? Or many?
Yes.
Yeah, good. Write for orchestra, please. Because, my worry is that young composers get so frustrated and bored with the orchestra as an institution that you lose interest. And I know it's it's a difficult time. There are not that many commissions. There are not that many programs where you can workshop your orchestral pieces, and usually you get very little rehearsal time and so on and so on. Still, the orchestra is such a great, endlessly fascinating instrument, and we need new repertoire. If no new music is being composed for the orchestra, then the institution is going to die. Because every day that goes by means that the distance between us and, say, Beethoven gets that much longer. So if we imagine the relevance of, say, Beethoven as a rubber band, so every day we stretch it a little more, and then one day, which I don't want to witness, it might snap, and then we have lost the relevance. Or he has lost the relevance. This has happened with Renaissance music, and we don't know what it means when we hear a piece by Perotinus or something like that. Medieval music, obviously, and we don't know what it means. We listen, but we don't know what it means. We still know what Beethoven means, and the only way to keep things alive is to make sure that the big trees are healthy when there's a lot of growth from the grassroots level, i.e. new music, new composers. So then the whole garden is healthy. And I'm been very worried when I meet with young composers sometimes in universities and music schools and so on, and I talk with people, and many have said that, well, we started our own little ensembles, and we are mostly doing now electronic music and so on, and I think that's a great pity. So don't lose faith, okay? Write for orchestra. Thank you. And questions if you have, I'm happy to answer.
Any questions?
So I have a question. What is the direction which music should follow? New music, especially new composers, young composers. Which way is it? What's it?
That's a big one. I don't know. Really don't. I really don't know. But I think that this is not a bad time to be a composer. Because the field is open. Much more open than what it was even a few decades ago. And so the stylistic map is much richer than what it was even 20 years ago, and I think you can develop a very individualistic approach, and it's okay. But to tell which way music is going to go, this is beyond my abilities. I would just say that be true to yourself. don't think too much about how you're being perceived. If you have something to say, say it. And the other thing that I would like to point out is that a system in itself has no value. System as a method to create expression is okay, but the system itself is never a solution to anything. And I think that's an important thing to keep in mind. Because if system was the goal in itself, then we wouldn't necessarily watch TV. We would look at the microchips and the LCD, the parts and the blueprints of a TV, but we wouldn't actually watch the program, if you know what I mean. And also, you know, the scaffolding outside the building, when it's being built, is not the interesting part, it's the building itself. But I cannot answer your question. so that was a good question.
I have a rather specific question, but you did conduct Schönbergs Violin Concerto with Orang-Utan, and I've been wondering, what's your idea of the expression of this piece? How would you describe it?
Well, funny thing happened, because I didn't like it before, and Deutsche Grammophon asked whether I would want to record it with Hilary, and I thought, okay, I'll do it, because it's her. I thought it was an unsuccessful piece. It was really, I thought it was very ugly and kind of short thoughts, and it didn't hang together, and also some of the violin writing was just insane. You know, there are some chords in the cadenza which I thought were unplayable. So then Hilary, she really taught me something. She approached the piece like she would approach a Brahms Violin Concerto, or Mozart, or, you know, Sibelius, one of the, with total commitment and total mastery of the, you know, the material and all that, and she also did the metronome tempos, which I didn't think were possible. And I said, well, the orchestra can't possibly do this. And Hilary said, yes, they can. Just rehearse. And we did. And something happened at the end. I thought, okay, there's something really powerful in this piece. I can't still say that it's one of my favorite Schönbergs, but I understood that if you really go into it and try to play it on the highest possible level, then something happens. It worked for me.
Yes, and I'm kind of interested in how would you describe this kind of power that can be felt when this piece is performed this way?
It's like a crocodile, you know, really impressive. You don't want to have a crocodile in your living room, but to see a crocodile and to observe a crocodile is really fascinating. But if you go too close, you might lose your arm or your head or something. So it's a crocodile. Anytime.
Hello. I wanted to ask, I believe you as composer deal with a huge amount of other composers' ideas. And how do you have some difficulties with, let's say, getting rid of those other composers' ideas when you compose your own music? Like, those they stick in your brain and you need some more time, or it's just normal for you, casual?
Yeah, I mean, we don't live in a vacuum anyway. I mean, I have a hard time imagining a composer who doesn't know any other music but his own or her own. So my idea is that we are part of the world, we are part of society, We have heard Perutinus, and we have heard Jimi Hendrix, and we have heard Beyoncé, and we have heard Xenakis, and so on. And so I'm quite happy to say that what I'm putting out is on a conscious or subconscious level has been influenced by everything I've ever heard. And I think this is true for almost other people also. But I have a concrete problem. I mean, there are days when I rehearse something and it just fills my mind, and also sometimes when I perform incredibly good music, which happens quite often, I get this feeling that who needs more music? Which is a stupid idea, because of course we need more music. And only I can write my music, only you can write your music, and so on. But it's sometimes different. I remember I was writing a piece for the London Sinfonietta a long time ago, and at the same time I was studying Petrushka for my first ever performance of the piece. And I stupidly studied Petrushka in the mornings, and then I wrote in the afternoons, and that was very difficult because I thought, why write more music because we have Petrushka? But of course that was a stupid thought, but that's how I felt. So sometimes, especially in LA, when after concerts, if I had conducted something that affected me really deeply, on my way home, first of all, I stopped at a whiskey bar and had a couple of whiskeys. That helps. But also, I asked my driver to play some heavy metal, and that was super good. I mean, like after Bruckner, to hear like Metallica or Foo Fighters or Grateful Dead, you know, it was super good. When I got home, I was clean and ready for the next thing.
Thank you.
There's time for one more, and then I think I have to go. But if you have something, I'm happy to.
Well, the composer you were cooperating with was also Henri Dutilleux. You have recorded correspondence for the first time. Could you please say some words about this music and your approach to Dutilleux?
I'm a huge fan of Dutilleux. The first time I was in contact with him was first time ever in my life, and I was in my 20s, and the French Radio Orchestra had played a few orchestral pieces by young European composers, and they played a early piece of mine called Giro. And out of the blue, there's a letter from Dutilleux. He had heard it, and he wrote a letter to me and said that he liked the piece and thank you very much. And I was just completely stunned. This is the great Henri Dutilleux. He writes to some guy in Finland who nobody has ever heard about. So he was that kind of a person. He was following young composers very closely, and he was a wonderful man. Over the years, I kept performing his music, and quite often in Paris also, because Paris was a funny place, because it was the dictator of Parisian music life was Pierre Boulez. And if you were not part of the Boulez circle, you were not performed that much, and Dutilleux was not. He was not part of the Boulez inner circle. So it was. I conducted the first ever Dutilleux concert with the Paris Opera Orchestra, for instance. It had never been done before, a full evening of Dutilleux orchestral music, for me it was a complete mystery because I thought this is one of the greatest composers alive. But he was a wonderful man, wonderful composer. He was very ill and quite, he had Alzheimer's, so he was quite out of it. He came to one of the recording sessions with me and Barbara Hannigan in Paris, and he was sitting in his wheelchair and he was kind of sleeping. And then Barbara went to his wheelchair and kind of kneeled down in front of Dutilleux and said, "Maître." And he woke up and saw Barbara Hannigan. He kind of woke up. "Oh, mademoiselle, c'est super, super." But then he felt that he has to kind of say something to me as well, and he started shouting, "Maître Salonen, c'est plus trop lent." And then I stupidly asked about harmonic in the contrabass part, which to me seemed to be in the wrong octave as a measure. Is this? How about this harmonic? And he started listening. He said, "No, it's all wrong. Everything's wrong." And I was like, "What do you mean?" "No, everything's wrong. Everybody's playing wrong notes." And the thing was that his ear had started to transpose. Happens sometimes when you get old. Strauss had the same problem, and Boulez, by the way. And Dutilleux had all of a sudden he started listening to the contrabass chord, and every note was wrong. At which point I thought, okay, thank you, we just carried on. But it was the last exchange we had in musical terms. Great composer. People, I have to go now, but it's a pleasure, and I'm just very happy to meet young composers. It cheers me up, and I know there's a future, and there's a new generation taking over when my generation is gone, and carrying the torch. So good luck. Thank you.
Thank you.